Elon Musk has become obsessed with Britain and British politics in particular. Just to clarify, this man, I believe, is a born South African citizen, became a Canadian citizen, and then became an American citizen, I believe. But as of late, his main source of ire and the main direction for his attention has been the UK, and in particular, mild-mannered Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Things really began to kick off back in the summer. So there was these quite large riots. Those of you in the UK will be more than aware of this. Those of you watching elsewhere in the world will likely have seen something of this too. These were sort of anti-immigration riots, and they turned really quite nasty. A kind of group of people, a kind of mob, for want of a better word, crowd of people sort of descended on a hotel in which asylum seekers who had arrived in the UK when we're going through the asylum claim process were staying. The crowd kind of managed to smash in and started a fire at the base of the hotel, right? Which, if you were inside, that would have been terrifying. The response to that was Keir Starmer. He condemned that. Elon Musk's response to that was to refer to him as two-tier Keir. This was the idea that rioters in the summer were being treated with greater harshness than one might be treated with if they weren't white. But so he kind of first stepped into this with his two-tier Keir comments, and he's really just continued this. And the kind of thing that these more recent aspects of this story are referring to is the decision by the UK government not to launch a further inquiry into the investigation and prosecution of Pakistani grooming gangs in the UK. Back in the 2000s, there were cases in which various towns in the UK, it emerged, had grooming gangs of Asian men who were picking up young, white, working class girls and abusing them. And there were real massive failures in how this was dealt with by the British police force. One of the big takeaways was that because these girls were working class, not well off, and because in many cases they had sort of received gifts or whatever as part of this grooming process, the police were very dismissive of their claims and sort of weren't particularly interested in pursuing it or looking into it. But obviously the way in which that was initially dealt with was a massive scandal. The sort of part of this sort of two-tier Keir narrative, the narrative that emerged along the far right was this idea that it hadn't been investigated because the police had gone woke or whatever, right? That they didn't want to sort of mess up multicultural Britain. But recently Elon Musk has really jumped on this. One of the big things that's happened recently is that Elon Musk has thrown his weight behind a figure called Tommy Robinson, who is a football hooligan turned political figure. His real name isn't Tommy Robinson. His real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon. Been to prison a bunch of times for a bunch of different things. Yeah, he had been banned from the US, for his criminal record. And he is probably the furthest right political adjacent figure in the UK. He led for many years an organisation called the English Defence League, which was the very least violence adjacent, even in the times where it didn't spill over into actual violence. Sort of street movement in which basically every 6 months a bunch of far right hooligans would turn up in your town and kind of march around a little bit, mostly trying to start a fight. The politics angle of things was important to them, but I think it always felt as though the starting of a fight was kind of a big part of it as well, And so he led this group for a good number of years. At the moment, and one of the particular reasons that Elon Musk has pitched in is that Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, is currently in prison. So he was jailed for 18 months for contempt of court, for repeating false allegations against a Syrian refugee in breach of an injunction. One of the interesting things is that Tommy Robinson also has massively sort of faded in significance as a figure in the UK. So, even back in 2019 was probably fading. So we looked a moment ago at the height of his power and influence, whatever, was the English Defence League, and the most you can find here is 6 years ago, but the height of it, you're looking 14 years ago, 11 years ago. This is a thing that passed some while ago. But Elon Musk has kind of resurrected him as a political prisoner. And just prior to that, actually, Elon Musk had also suggested that he was going to give $100 million to the Reform Party. So the Reform Party kind of threading the needle between the Conservative Party, which has itself swung massively to the right in recent years and become a sort of through the looking glass version of its former self. Basically, at the moment, you hear absolutely zero from them. And Kemi Badenoch, their leader, probably the only thing that I've really heard from Kemi Badenoch as someone who actively seeks out political news for my job lately, is that she thinks lunch is for wimps and that sandwiches aren't a real food. But the Conservatives sort of disappeared a little bit, and having the wind taken out of their sails by the Reform Party. The Reform Party being the brainchild of Nigel Farage, was briefly known as the Brexit Party, which has kind of overtaken the Conservative Party from the right. Maybe not overtaken just yet. Reform voters, only 35% of people who voted Reform, think Kemi Badenoch is the bee's knees, as it were. So, the Conservatives' fear is that, voting can often be quite sticky. And in a first-past-the-post, very majoritarian political system like that which exists in the UK, it can be even more so. The Labour Party these days very much monopolises the vote of anyone from the political centre to the far left, right? Not that it always gets those votes, but there is always the sense that if you don't want a Tory MP, or if you don't want a Tory government or whatever, it makes most sense to vote Labour in most seats, right? Because they are the most likely to win in a lot of seats. At the very least, they are the most likely to form a government that is not a Conservative government. And the same is true on the other side. The party that you are most likely to vote for and for them to form a government that isn't a Labour government is the Conservative Party. And, for Nigel Farage previously, that has been a problem. There will be people who will have wanted to vote Reform. It certainly happened in 2019. I think there was a little bit of a kind of quiet deal that happened with the Conservative Party. But there will have been people that would have wanted to vote Reform, but would have gone, do you know what? I don't want the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn to win, and therefore would have voted Tory. And it takes a long time to be able to really be able to really convince voters. Well, firstly, to convince voters that want to vote Reform, but really don't want a Labour government to vote Reform rather than Conservative. And then to go to the next step, which is to get to the point where there will be people who will want to vote Conservative, but will vote Reform because Reform seem like the second horse in the race, right? Or maybe the first horse in the race, who knows? And it does feel like, at the moment, there is this crucial moment where that could happen. I'm not saying it will, but it feels possible. It feels like Nigel Farage and the Reform Party could manage to get ahead of the Tories and kind of take over the role of the opposition. Paul says Farage has Trump-like appeal. He claims to be the unconventional politician. He claims to be a normal person, but is rich. He says people's woes are due to the immigrants, not the rich, and wealth inequality. Yeah, I think Nigel Farage has long been has sort of been a Donald Trump figure since before Donald Trump was a Donald Trump figure. The old sort of saying was that he had the sort of I can drink a pint with him appeal. But a donation of $100 million, right? That is a big donation in British political terms. British politics does not have the kind of money in it that American politics does. There are quite strict limits, not only in what you can donate, but also in how much money a political party can spend during each election, and also how much money each individual candidate for each individual seat can spend in each contest too. But at the same time, even the notion of having Elon Musk's backing has become a signal of something. At the very least, it creates that connection between Trump and Farage, which I think Farage quite likes. That love-in between Elon Musk and Nigel Farage, however, has come under some strain, precisely because Elon Musk decided to throw his weight behind Tommy Robinson, and Nigel Farage was kind of pushed back against this. Musk has said that Britain needs Reform UK to sort it out. Elon Musk has been kind of tweeting his support for Tommy Robinson, but kind of Nigel Farage is in an interesting place right now. You know, as we were saying, he's trying to get the Reform Party to be the default choice for anyone even vaguely on the political right to vote for. So he's not just trying to convince people who would like to vote Reform to vote for Reform rather than vote Conservative. He's also trying to get his party to the point where people who want to vote Conservative in some seats will go, oh no, but I feel like I have to vote for Reform. And part of doing that is trying to provide a way in to the Reform Party for old school Tory voters who maybe aren't on board with the more extreme ends of that anti-immigrant rhetoric, that extreme ends of that racism, who certainly wouldn't want to consider themselves as existing in the same universe as Tommy Robinson, former leader of the EDL. And one thing that and Nigel Farage throughout his political career has spot the moments where he can really push to the extremes. You know, the moments where he's been down on a boat in the English Channel watching boats of refugees coming across the channel and sort of being like, we should turn these boats back, and kind of really riling up that extreme faction of the right wing of British politics. And then at other times pitching more to the centre right. And I think one of the ways he does this, which is successful, is he finds moments where one part already has the momentum, and so he can. So, for example, at the moment, you know, that much more virulently racist wing, anti-migrant wing of the kind of what Nigel Farage probably sees as a hopeful Reform coalition, that's already running ahead. Those people are already enthusiastic. They're probably going to vote for his party. Like that, he doesn't need to worry about firing them up. And therefore, what he's doing is actually going, you know, actually, I'm now going to play the sensible sort of centre-right figure and try and peel off some of those people who might actually want to vote Conservative, but he thinks he can bring into his fold. And so Elon Musk coming out massively in support of Tommy Robinson is not actually that helpful for Nigel Farage as things stand. And then, having pushed back against that, Elon Musk has decided that Nigel Farage should resign as the leader of the Reform Party. If you're watching from elsewhere in the world, I cannot get across how 4D chess, which is actually 1D chess, this move is. So, Nigel Farage, okay, has only been an MP for less than a year. He was briefly a member of the European Parliament as well. He lost at trying to become an MP many, many times. He has never been Prime Minister. Like, if you're looking at Nigel Farage's, like, political career in the way that you would assume that you should calculate how successful a politician had been, so, you know, how long they were an MP, how many elections they won, that kind of thing. Nigel Farage has been awful, right? He's been dreadful. However, in terms of like making the country do things that he would like, Nigel Farage is like one of the most successful, if not the most successful, British politicians of the past half decade. So Elon Musk's current proposal for who should lead the Reform Party is this chap, Rupert Lowe, who is a member of Parliament for the Reform Party. However, I cannot get across the extent to which Nigel Farage, in the centre of this photo here, is like the most recognisable British politician. The Independent has had to run an article called, which the headline of which is, "Who is Rupert Lowe? From unpopular football chairman to Musk's candidate to lead reform after Farage fallout." And it's also fascinating. I mean, the extent to which, tweeting about Rupert Lowe, the extent to which Elon Musk is not only showing an interest in British politics, not only showing a certain obsession with British politics, but is so in the weeds of British politics that he's tweeting about Reform MP Rupert Lowe. So there is a big question about how the government respond to this in terms of like, do they let him give that money? I think there is a danger that they don't step in and they let him do the donation from a point of view of not being want to seem to be interfering directly in this particular donation. They wouldn't want to interfere in it because they wouldn't want a future reform government to interfere with donations to their party. Despite the fact that, I'm not suggesting for a moment that reform would do that, but I don't think that would make them refrain from doing so if they were planning on doing it. So I think, the big question to like really tie all this off is like, why is Elon Musk so into Britain at the moment? This idea that, Elon Musk is part of the British diaspora, which, I suppose he's sort of part of the diaspora of Britain, then South Africa, then Canada, then America, which maybe he cares about Britain because his grandma lived here. It's weird that it's not come up before. Another take I've seen from a sort of more left-leaning commentator was that all of this is to do with workers' rights and that he's managed to crush attempts to get union representation and better conditions at his factories in the US. Tesla remains one of the only, I think it's the only major car manufacturer which isn't unionized, I think I'm right in saying, in the US. And that it's an extension to that. I saw another analysis of this, which was that it's sort of to do with the guns, and that he can be Britain is bad because they let them take the guns away, whatever, and therefore America is good because we're allowed to rebel, or whatever. My theory is that it's much, much, much simpler than all of that. I think what Elon Musk has discovered is that doing a political campaign, being involved in an election campaign, or being the person raging against the people in power, it's kind of easy to be the guy that is criticizing Joe Biden. It's quite easy to be the guy that is plumping for Donald Trump during the election campaign. But Donald Trump went and won. And it might initially seem great for Elon Musk that Donald Trump has won, and I'm sure it will be in material terms. But Elon Musk also likes to be cool. I think one of the reasons that he turned against his former environmentalism was that people within the climate movement remained skeptical of him, even though he was doing all the electric car stuff, right? Back in the day, it is worth saying that Elon Musk making electric cars cool is a real thing, which had a real sizable impact on the world, right? Prior to Elon Musk, and Tesla becoming like the cool iPhone of cars, electric cars were lame, right? They weren't cool. Elon Musk made them actively cool, like a thing that people wanted to have. And yet, people in the climate movement were still like, yeah, but electric cars, they're a good step. It's much better that we have electric cars than fossil fuel cars. That's much better, and they can and forever will exist as part of a greater multimodal transport system. So I do think Elon Musk wants to be cool, right? Because he thought like he was going to get all the street cred for doing the electric cars, and he didn't. And so he sort of turned against that and was like, well, if you're not going to think I'm cool, then I don't care about that anymore. But it's really hard it might be, Trump winning might get Elon Musk a lot of the things that he wants in terms of, regulations being stripped back, in terms of contracts for his companies, SpaceX getting contracts from NASA and so on and so forth, being allowed to do the brain chips in ways that a more regulation-happy government might not let him do. However, it's going to be hard to also be really cool to everyone during that period. And what switching his attention to the UK allows him to do is effectively just be in opposition again. Because actually governing, actually turning this coalition of voters and this broad, vague, often inconsistent ideas which make up Trumpism. Because I think Trumpism, like at its real heart, is a kind of quite guttural anger at the way things are. And there are sort of clearer bits of ideology within that. But that's going to be really difficult, as it was last time around, to not only make that a system of government, but to also be popular whilst doing so. And I think the very simple fact of it is that switching all his focus to Keir Starmer into the UK allows Elon Musk to go back into that space of being the guy that rages against the machine again. And he's got 4 whole years of that before him giving a donation to Reform might lead to Reform being in government. In which case, at which point maybe Trump will be back out again if there's another US election.